So we're here for ending the new food wars conversation and recording this call in part to share it with Dr. Elizabeth Satoris, who's inspired us to come together for this discussion. And we're just doing a bit of a check-in round now on what drew people to the conversation today. So I think we're going in the order people arrived. Chuck, that would make you the next one.
Yeah, I love what Michael was saying before, and I think absolutely my experience is colored so much by the traveling I've done recently, and an understanding of how do communities come together around food, and what roles does food have in shaping how we self-identify and how we create community. So I think for me, it's a reminder about just the overall the lives that most animals live in the world, the kind of really miserable circumstances that most animals are living in. So for myself, I'm interested in hearing hearing more perspectives on how, and especially from like a regulatory perspective, how can we create circumstances where animals are treated with dignity and with care, and especially from having the perspective of traveling, where it was crucially important for me to learn in various languages how to say no vegetarian, no chicken, no pork. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. Let's see, Bill. Hold on, we gotta unmute you here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm always interested in what Elizabeth has to say. She's really brilliant in so many different ways, and I think this intervention is really important. As a who's close to both permaculture and holistic management practitioners, I understand the depth of the challenge in creating whole systems that include animals as part of that mix. And I think these challenges are a subset of the challenges of intolerance that are, that have been alluded to by Michael and others already. So I'm really interested in that question. And as a advocate and supporter of African farmers around the continent, I recognize the need to center food, a place which is the right of people to determine how and what they grow and how and how they eat and all that. So there's another layer for me in that. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. Ingemetta.
Thank you, Ben. It is close to 10 o'clock evening in Norway. So I was looking to see Elizabeth Satoris on the Zoom call as a night flight. Even if it was 11, 12 or 1 o'clock in the night, I would have been up. So I'm ready to do a night flight again with Elizabeth. Just to say that, because for you in the US, it's daytime, more or less. It's the time of the coronavirus hitting us all. And I have this feeling of not knowing if the food wars are behind us or in front of us. So the collapse of the world as we see it now, it's like putting the food system that we have it in stress. So the value chain is completely disrupted. Financial stress. So we're going back to a local community farming and value exchange, maybe. I'm here because I am dedicated to assist Zimbabwe and Southern Africa in the food crisis. I see the savannas of the Southern Africa as a early story, as it could be like Australia in the future. So the replanting efforts of agrotech, the best people we can find on the planet, we need to assist Africa on a radical green deal for Africa. And one thing is humans crying for water or crying for food and into starvation. The other thing is when the big animals are crying for water and food. So I think it's an obligation, as it is for the world, to assist for the Amazon to plant and to keep the rainforests. It is an obligation for all of us to secure that we have a food security system in Southern Africa. So it's not only about justice and human rights or earth rights or animal rights, it's the survival of all of us. So Alan Savary, coming from Zimbabwe, mixing with animals, agrotech, future science, water management, solar energy. We have all the tools we can to assist the poorest countries of the planet. And very in deep, dire situation because of the corona as well. So I'm here. It's food justice, food systems. I would also like to say that I'm working with the Society for Organizational Learning globally, and we are having a focus from Spain on agriculture and food security and healthy food. And with the corona now, Spain in fact has 18 or over 11 million less people, because all the tourists are then back in their home countries. So they have a surplus of food in Spain, in fact. So it could be that definitely there is surplus of food in some places, and we are eating in a very stupid way. We could eat better and nourish ourselves much, much smarter, and have a cooperative enterprising models that will sustain all of us better, even animals. The SDGs, number 17, is misunderstood. They think it's a partnership between humans, but it's a partnership with animals and the other kingdoms that exist together with us. So, yeah, that's my introduction for now.
Yeah. Welcome. Maybe I'll go next. You wanted to go last? I'll check in too. Well, the first thing that drew me here, I have to say, is your introduction, Ingermetta, personal introduction to Elizabeth,
Yes.
which happened before the last edition of Now What. And I had always, well, since I first saw her, I think in the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium, she's featured telling the famous story of the metamorphosis of the caterpillar into the butterfly as a way of understanding systemic transformation. And it's such a powerful and interesting story. It was the first time I had heard it and had no idea that the caterpillar didn't actually sort of become the butterfly, but it dissolved, and these other little imaginal cells inside its body that were first treated like invaders then come together and and eventually become the butterfly, and just such a rich metaphor. So it was so exciting to me, sort of like meeting one of my heroes, I guess, or someone who had inspired me a lot to connect with her. And we had a number of conversations over the months, some including you. And she's very busy trying to slow down and do some writing, but this captured her, is what she said. She was sort of pulling back from other projects. She wanted to go on a writing retreat, but this food thing captured her, and that was also very exciting for me, because food has been a focus of my own sort of interest in activism and systemic transformation, going back probably to the 90s, but in particular starting in 2002, when I left the small business that I had founded 8 years before and was looking for something new. Food was the first thing I looked at as a place to put my own energies, and the local and sustainable organic food movement. We didn't say regenerative back in 2002. at least not in my circles. But so it's something I've been concerned about and paying a lot of attention to in my own life, but also systemically. I've been on for the last 2 years the steering committee for Food Solutions New England, which is a whole systems change initiative, network based, a lot of connections to June Holly that Bill mentioned before. They're currently offering the 21-day racial equity challenge. It's in its 4th day now. Highly recommended. You get an email every day with information, readings and reflection questions and some action. And it's both food and racial justice. Really, really well curated, and we'll be doing calls for that group on Fridays. Anyway, so this all feels very relevant. And when Elizabeth, I'll tell a little bit more of a story since we're doing this, right? The beginning of Now What also has a connection to this conversation. Now What began first as an initiative we called conference weaving, with the idea being to gather people virtually before and after conferences to enhance their impact. And the second edition of Now What, we partnered with 5 conferences that were all happening between April and June of last year. So the Now What conversations were in May and June. One of them was a conference here in New England at Dartmouth College called Cows, Land, and Labor. And I went to that one. We also worked with the Climate Change and Consciousness at Findhorn, the New Economy and Social Innovation Forum in Malaga, Spain, Reporting 3.0 in Rotterdam, and the Gather Lab in San Francisco. Those were the 5. And we had people at all of those, as well as coming together, for virtual engagement. So one of the tracks in that Cows, Land, and Labor conference was, there were 2 that were relevant to this conversation. One was about climate and the impact of climate of livestock, and there was people from the Marine Carbon Project were there. There was a strong cohort, standing for managed intensive rotational grazing, the Alan Savory, ideas and ideas of others. And they had thought they wanted to invite vegans to that conference because there's also an ethics of meat eating was another track. And they decided they could not do it because their engagement with some of the lead activists, they were looking at some of the Hollywood folks and others, people who'd made films. They were so virulent in their attitudes that the feeling of the conveners was that it just wouldn't work if they had them there. And then at the conference, that sort of the general consensus that emerged from everybody was veganism is a dead end. Now, the vegans weren't there, or if they were quiet, so they didn't defend that. But I think the general take on that was very much what Elizabeth's saying in this article, that the notion that somehow we're going to have no animals involved in agriculture is madness. That's not how the natural world works. That doesn't mean we can't be completely opposed to confined animal feeding operations and the terrible conditions in which animals are raised industrially, but as Elizabeth points out, we're doing that to plants too, and to natural ecosystems as a result. So anyway, that was one of the earliest. The second thing called Now What, and the first one that looks a lot more like what we're doing now in the 4th edition. And so Elizabeth, I'm sorry you're not here. I hope you're getting some good rest, and that you do watch this at some point, and that we come up with some reflections on what you've written that will be valuable to you. But if nothing else, I hope you're with us in spirit, and you're a strong guide and influence. So, Alan, John.
I've always been interested in the food wars as they started developing as early as the late 70s. You see all this droughts and things, and people, food scarcity around the world for odd reasons, and sometimes war, sometimes it's drought. But I'm just trying to learn more about how we can make it more equitable and feed everybody. I mean, it's possible. We have the resources. We just got to figure out how to distribute it and organize it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, immediately, I never thought I would live at a time when I was told about the animals in Australia dying in such numbers, so many. And I never thought I would be told how many species have gone. And I never thought that the bees would be endangered and treated as badly. They're like a lower class, a working class. They are so unfairly exploited. So the animal question is very serious to me. But what I wanted to present to you is that I see all my life in my family, I would speak for myself and my family as I know them, we have a lens of food. Food is the lens through which I perceive my existence. My two political heroes are Jean Houston and Molly Ivins, and they both say, if you want to get things done politically, you've got to have a feast. And Jean Houston talks about her Italian grandmother cooking and cooking and cooking and scolding you if you don't arrive hungry when she has an 8-course meal, and how much that, was a lubricant for things to happen. And my favorite movie, Babette's Feast, where these two people in Scandinavia make the harmony in the world by the cooking. My father-in-law, who was donated to the Culinary Society, and when he traveled to Europe, he always brought his fishing rod and his skillet with him so that he could cook for his hosts that he met on the way, and telling that he learned how to make crepe Suzette from the man who invented them. But my own father would think nothing of driving 3 hours to a restaurant. And he had this guy, Duncan Hines, who people know now there's a Duncan Hines mix, cake mix or something. But Duncan Hines was one of the first things I learned about. They had a rating for restaurants, cleanliness as well as good food and how far away it took to get there. And other kids would play games about pretend and house. Well, we used to play Duncan Hines, and we used to sneak into people's kitchens and write reports about how cleanliness they were and how their cooking was. And we used to write reviews about the cooking. We used to be Duncan Hines in each other's kitchens. And that's just the beginning of the story. Jean Houston taught about Rupert Sheldrake. He said that the egg, the human egg, the embryo, has 3 layers around the egg. And one has to do with forming muscle, and one has to do with forming a nervous system, and the third is the digestive system. And that usually people don't have a completely even balance of the 3, but some people are just more muscular in their orientation to the world. And some people, the very nervous system is very sensitive and finely tuned. And I just have this digestive system and this orality. And my mother died when I was 8 days old, and I'm still trying to get that oral pleasure. And I've studied all the psychology about oral pleasure. And then we come to inequality. I try hard to be generous and mindful and think about equality and have empathy. But when it comes to food, that's where the discipline is failing. And I think nothing of wasting, I would call it wasting money on food that is so expensive. And I buy the food and I think to myself how that money could be better spent than at a restaurant or whatever. But somehow I have never translated it sufficiently to my own thinking to have a food budget, maybe, a money budget, and say, okay, this is how much money for me, and this is how much money for the people I entertain, and I will no longer spend no matter what for food just because I feel I inherited my father's money and he wanted me to spend it on food and on restaurants. So I have a lot of concern about that. But then I raised 2 children, not knowing how to be a mother. And I swear the main concern was how to feed them, how to not have them grow up fat, not have them grow up, I don't know, with Freud, all those Freudians, sugar. Well, the sugar wasn't the thing at the time. It was more that came later, the sugar. I was like trained like a monkey with sugar. You do something, you get candy. You do something, you get candy. You do something, you get candy. But my children, I was thinking about Freud and oral stuff, and mothers can hurt their children if they don't know what they're doing. Dr. Spock had his ways of feeding, and I was always failing. But there was more to that. There was breastfeeding was an enormous issue. I felt like if I didn't succeed in breastfeeding, my poor child would never, ever have a happy life. And it goes on like that. But I was telling John that back in those days, when I was in my 20s, one of the theories that I came upon with food was that they had a lot of babies who were at the age where they could hold their own sippy cups and they could eat with their own fingers. They may be 1 to 2-year-olds, I don't know, maybe younger than that. And they offered them like a buffet all the time, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This large number of babies were offered, they could just grab vegetables and rice. They could grab all these different foods. Anytime they wanted, they could eat what they wanted. There was no sugar ever offered to them. That's what I remember for sure. And probably there was no fried food offered to them either. But otherwise, there was just like everything. And so they watched what the babies did, and they ate very unbalanced meals. They'd only eat something and they wouldn't eat anything else, and they'd do this and they do that. But over time, those charts, those graphs, those babies knew how to feed themselves very well. And then both with the babies and with the monkeys in Kenya, as soon as the tourists started leaving a lot of sugar in their garbage, the monkeys in Kenya lost a whole lot of their ability once they started eating too much sugar. Okay, yes, Inga? You're agreeing.
She's muted.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Okay, I'm just seeing that Ben is leaving, so I was like saying goodbye.
Bill is leaving, yeah.
Hmm.
Good to see you, Bill. And sorry we won't have you for the meat of the conversation, which I think is coming up soon.
I will. I actually have to pick groceries away. My wife just brought them back from the store, and we need to clean them.
Yeah.
Speaking of food, and as soon as it's done, I'll try to dip back in because this is a
Okay.
fascinating group of people. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bill.
Thank you.
Bye.
Another reason I came today is because of Inga Mehta, who told me about the speaker. And I got very excited about that, and we'll follow through on that. So anyway, the idea that we do have some inner wisdom about what to eat, and we don't have to listen to all these people who keep telling us to do this, and do that, and do this, and do that, and eat this, and supplement that, as if one of my teachers says that the body has wisdom that's much more ancient than the doctor's wisdom.
And you know, this is maybe a good segue into the specific conversation that Elizabeth is inviting us into with her blog post, Ending the New Food Wars. She prefaces it, or the sort of the tagline quote that she starts the piece with is this: from an evolutionary perspective, she says, it is very strange that an intelligent species has to tell itself what to eat on its own planet and to argue fiercely over the alternatives. So she's essentially validating exactly what you're saying, Mom, that we have this innate wisdom, but somehow we've gotten all tangled up with our intelligence going awry and these arguments about what we should and shouldn't eat that she talks about in the piece. You know, the primary focus in the piece is on the question of eating meat and the fact that we've seen both sort of a long-term kind of fairly militant movement among vegans saying that we shouldn't eat animals because it's cruel to eat an animal, period, you know, and certainly given some of the conditions animals are raised under. Then more recently, we've had livestock, particularly beef, being blamed for greenhouse gas emissions, and the idea that the best way to prevent climate change, maybe the only way, is to stop eating meat. And so those two things have come together and created this very strong group of people who are simply saying we must all become vegans, all meat is bad. And Elizabeth is reacting to that and saying, no, you know, there is a place for animals. Doesn't mean everyone has to eat them. It's fine to be a vegan or to be most, you know, to eat a plant-based diet and not very much meat, as Michael Pollan suggests, and she's, you know, citing him and influenced by him as well. But let's also understand what people like Alan Savory are demonstrating, which is that part of the solution to climate can be using grazing properly done to regenerate grasslands and sequester carbon in the soil. and that it's also simply it's the way plants and animals have co-evolved, and the notion that we should separate them is crazy. The industrial monocultures are what's truly crazy, and what we can all unite to oppose. And so she's pleading with anybody that understands how terrible that is, whether it's the way we grow plants or the way we treat the animals, that we should focus our energies on that and not on fighting with each other about this diet or that diet, whether it's for ethical reasons or environmental ones or whatever. She also interestingly mentions that there's science about plants being sentient and having feelings and many more senses even than we do, and that we should be as concerned, if we're caring about the ethical impact of how we raise our food, we should be as troubled by what the plants are experiencing as we are by what the animals are experiencing. So that's sort of a summary of the article, the blog post, and her cry, her plea is that we find some way to end these food wars. And I'd like to just go back around one more time. I see you unmuting yourself, Michael, and I'd love to go in the same order and just do another round from everybody to sort of hear, based on all of that, what's the, is there a conversation you most want to have here today? And maybe we'll find that there's one we align on, maybe there's two and we split up, maybe we have, I don't know, but let's just sort of hear what's, in this context, where do you stand and what feels most important? Do you want to discuss and debate the points? Do you want to, talk about ideas we could put forth to help shift the conversation? Do you want to talk about the work you're doing and how to find support for that, or something else? So, Michael, I'll go back over to you. And maybe I'll set a timer this time too. So I'll give everyone sort of 3 minutes for this. And if you hear the tone, you don't have to stop, but just, try to wrap up, and we'll go around fairly quickly then. So go ahead, Michael.
Sure. I think there are kind of two questions here. And one question is, how do we have thoughtful conversation about difficult topics with various perspectives? And that's a serious problem in my view across the globe, which is the loss of civility, and not in the sense of just let's be nice to each other, but how do we explore deeply the issues and get to the facts, even if they're not the ones that we are particularly in alignment with, so that we can learn and actually get smarter. And if we can't do that, I think we're in trouble. The second question is, how do we create the capacity to have local food systems that are more resilient in the face of disruptions in the supply chain, which can and will come about from any number of factors? And how do we help people be more self-sufficient in terms of their food supply, particularly in terms of creating a healthy supply of food that creates healthy soil and that takes account of the kind of important interaction and synergy between plants and animals when working together, in a proper ecological system. So those are the kind of questions that really attract me.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Chuck, let's go over to you.
Yeah, I love those questions from Michael. I also think that access is so important, and reaching communities that have been left behind, that have been and I love all the conversations about food sovereignty as well. And I think for myself too, and something Michael and I have talked about is, how can we also facilitate more resilient and kind of connected enterprises that are cross-generational, that are cross-cultural, that connect people from rural spaces and urban spaces, and even communities around the world to to provide kind of support and connection. So I think that's one of the questions that I've been really excited to talk to Michael about, and I'm excited to speak more about with this community too.
Yeah, excellent.
Yes.
Ingrid, yeah.
I'd like to go back to the spirit of Helen, and when you started to talk about the food and the kitchen and in fact the grandmothers. What I learned from Elizabeth, I'm not able to repeat everything, but bacteria are us. That's one of her statements. So from this, I learned that people think that we are eating food. But in fact, when the food comes into us, they start playing with our system in our stomach. And if you doubt that statement, you try to drink 2 bottles of red wine and you see who is the boss of the body. Okay? So there is a shifting on how we understand enzymes and nutrition in our bodies. Even maybe on a spiritual level, because you don't want to eat something that is, you see an animal that is very painfully killed, and then you start eating it afterwards with no respect. That for sensitive beings, we don't like to do that. When it comes from Elizabeth again, I was studying the shift in business and enterprises. The shift from the Royal Dutch Shell, like Aire de Geus, the living company. So the problem is the shift from industrial production of food to a living system. And then I see all over the world in business people and management, they're using the word metamorphosis. And they don't really know what it means. But for me, Elizabeth knows this. And that's why he wrote the book, the Dance of Change, and how the transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly start to move beautifully in this world. And this is the stories of the grandmothers and what they're telling the children in the kitchen, and the daughters and the sons, and the intergenerational learning stories on food. But that's shifting, for the truth of yesterday are not the same as the living system of our food and energy and health in the future. It's going to change, and it's changing as we speak. And Ben, when you're talking about Elizabeth, you are like this, and I feel like this, and I've been so lucky that I followed my instinct to travel to Mallorca and meet Elizabeth. So I was a guest for 1 week in your house, Elizabeth. If you look this, it was a grateful experience, and it's the first time I've been running after someone who has written a book and is important in this world. And I can see you're inspired people all over the world, to every corners of the planet. But when it comes to the caterpillar being a butterfly, to get out of that cocoon, it comes with force and strength and some muscles and power to start flying. So it's not only like it's a powerful story that we need to grasp a bit. So the cooperative mood of humans, when we start, that we understand that we have to work together instead of killing each other, that's better or less expensive to work together than killing each other. Then we can start cultivating the peace culture. So, and that's also some of the sentences I've heard Elizabeth say, that it's a cooperative mood. And that's how we use our own body as a metaphor for a living organic system of life. And here I'm not able to express more that here we had to have the wisdom of Elizabeth herself to share thoughts with us. And especially, Ben, because it's a know what situation. The coronavirus is really putting a know what. So it's like closing my eyes out. Now what can we do as the situation will ask us to stand up and do and create the projects that we and partnerships and stamina to do something, but it must come from a place of joy and happiness around food and gratitude. So yeah, this for now, and I love to go in and work with small groups, talk more, find a way how to dance this into something. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ingemetta.
Thank you. I'll mute myself.
John, what's the conversation you're most interested in having in this context here? Do you have a sense of that? Hold on, we got to see if I can unmute you on my end. Yes, you're good. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Well, I spent years growing up on a farm, right, raising tons and thousands of chickens, and I got familiar with what they call chicken manure. You know, it's how powerful it can be as far as useful soil regeneration and turn really lame soil into something that's amazing. But you look at it around the world, and now the food shortages, the scarcity. A lot of that is based upon two things, in my opinion: is the lack of water, the heating up of the ocean, global warming, of course, and then the people who are in power, they like to control people, so they stifle trade and innovation and allowing people to be self-supporting. They don't want to be self-supporting. They want you to be subservient to their will. So the wars are going to come on if we don't do something about it. And a lot of people, if we can do something about it, just got to figure out what to do next. I think all the little cities around, like Detroit, you can almost find out a city, a vacant lot on every block. If you were to plant that into corn, can you imagine how much corn you'd have? Things like that. We could be kind of a revolutionary thing, kind of like banks. You go around and plant gardens all over the place, like Johnny Appleseed. Anyway, the conversation about food wars is a concern, but it's all based upon water and rain and a few other things like that with global warming. So,
in this case, though, John, if I can just clarify, right? Elizabeth's talking about the new food war between progressive people about what we should eat and whether we should eat animals or not. That's the war that's troubling her. She says the war we want to fight is against big food, against industrial agriculture, the things that you're naming, the things that are destabilizing the climate and that are creating food shortages. She's all for having that war, the war with that industry.
I get it.
She doesn't want us fighting, people that otherwise should agree and support that, fighting about whether we can,
Well, I can see where my interest in harvesting 1 million wild pigs a year in the United States alone would be enough to upset a lot of people. I feel the same way. They're smart animals. They're very clever. They're interesting animals. They got an interesting life cycle. But boy, they cost us $1 billion worth of food damage every year, and it's millions of them. And then the Asian carp is floating up and down the Mississippi River. It's unbelievable how much damage they're doing. And they're about to invade the Great Lakes, which is a $4 billion whitefish of some sort industry. And these people, you got Asian carp coming up the channel, and they could wipe them out in a matter of 2 to 3 years. It's a tremendous problem. Right. And we could feed a lot of people in Asia with Asian carp who love smoked Asian carp fish, which came from Asia. And on top of that, fish oil and fish meal, boy, there's about, millions of pounds per month demand by commercial farmers, open ocean farming, fish farmers and things like that. So there's a lot of use. We could clean up the environment in one way and provide food and products and employment and create local jobs in rural areas and city areas by doing this environmental remediation. Now, that comes in the argument with the people who are doing all the vegans and the meat eaters. Well, there's a lot of meat eaters in China, so ship it. Anyway, so that's kind of a fun thing to tie in with what you're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
And when John was little, his father was a county agent, and if somebody's turkey got sick, his father would be called to help advise, and if their turkey farm got sick. And so John, as a young child, would drive there with his father, watch his father pick up a live turkey, kill him, cut his stomach open, tell the farmer what kind of nutrition that turkey needed, what kind of food, what was wrong with the diet of the turkey, looking at what the turkey was eating, looking at the symptoms.
Looking at the bad livers due to a disease or some sort, yeah.
He was very young when he saw all of that. And then all of a sudden his father, who was so successful doing that, didn't have a job anymore because something happened with Russia and wheat.
Well, it was the Nixon timeframe when they sold tons and tons of wheat to Russia. It changed the food industry in Texas, where the price of feed for chickens and turkeys and cows skyrocketed, and it put a lot of people, small farmers, out of business. Almost bankrupt General Mills, one that's still in business today, but almost put them in bankruptcy. So it's quite interesting to see that. I didn't realize, it took me years to realize that's what happened.
And Wendell Berry is a big hero of mine, a hero of the small farmer. He has the most exquisite movie, talking about the small farm. I want to say something about what you might call what's in the way, the denial. I talked to Paula Gunn Allen, a Native American novelist. I was with her, and she and I had something in common. We both knew that we ate on behalf of our ancestors who starved. And we knew that. We knew that they survived because they hoped that they would have children, grandchildren, families in the future who would prosper if they could only keep going. Like the story of Danny Boy, where the Irish people sent one representative out of Ireland so that somebody would live, because the potato problem was killing everybody. The monoculture, as I understand it, of the potatoes was killing everybody in Ireland. So that song, Danny Boy, is about watching those young men say goodbye to their sweethearts and families. But so this need to get I went to an Orthodox Jewish event, and I had a lot of expectations that these would be the holiest people in my family, in my religion, who would follow the religion the best. And instead, when it came time to food, my God, they looked like vultures. They just had at it at those food tables. I think it's for that reason. But I want to say another two denial things at least. One is I'm thinking about the quality of my experience in this planet and my life. And even though it's very nice to think that I can contribute, and I do, never in the history of mankind have people been able to eat as royally as I can eat. Not Louis XIV or anybody could have the quality. And for me to miss that experience, it would be like somebody who doesn't go outdoors and misses everything outdoors. So that's a reason that it gets hooked. We get hooked on the things that we love in that category. And isn't it interesting that Michael Pollan is moving into psychedelics, moving into mushrooms and LSD? What in the world? Substituting food instead of food trips. We're now going to be thinking about magic mushrooms and LSD. Isn't that connected to something that's going on here? I don't know exactly what.
Well,
All right. Well, Bill is back with us. So, Bill, we're here. We are with about 15 minutes left to go in the call, and we're doing a round on what each of us might want to talk about. So I'm thinking, food is so central, and we've got the racial equity challenge that's also got a lot of food-related stuff going on, and I think, and then there's food-related concerns with the pandemic too. I'm thinking some of the different topics that we're hearing here might be good for subsequent conversations. We have 4.5 weeks more of Now What.
Yes. Ben, if you allow me, I found a PowerPoint presentation from Elizabeth.
Okay, well, can we hear from Bill first to complete the circle?
Yes. But
internal
I think,
conversations people want to have, and then we'll do that.
Bill, you want to go on, or you want me to?
I'm fine with just rolling with what is
All right.
for the next 15 minutes.
All right. So you got a PowerPoint
Thank
you
you.
want to share from Elizabeth?
No, it's just two or three slides, because I think when Michael and your partner Michael presented, I could see in a lightning that you had the capacity that we really can bring someone that is something forward that is unique. And also with you, Bill, coming with all your expertise from Africa and all this thing, I really think we have to look into a cooperative enterprising mood for food systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can, I'd love to explore this a little bit further. But if you allow me, I'll share and it goes back to you, Helen, as well. Let me see. Is it possible to share it? Is
Yep.
it working? Okay. Can I share? Would you allow me?
I think I have to make you, I've changed the settings here because of some of the Zoom bombing going on. So you should be able to share now. You're a co-host.
Oh, thanks. Let me see. That's one. That's the one. This is from Elizabeth. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the Charles Darwin, the survival of the fittest. We fight for our food. And then the next one. So it's into the evolution of humanity going into the cooperative mood. So that's where Elizabeth is presenting how, let's look at how nature integrates these two perspectives. So this is Elizabeth's slides, and please allow me, Elizabeth, to share them. And that's the cooperation. So when Michael was mentioning that they are like specializing in local food systems and food supply chain and cooperative enterprising across the food chain, I think that's something we should, I'd love to explore and see how we could contribute in a constructive way beyond food wars into a living system for the food system. Yeah, so that's the new level.
Yeah.
So that was my contribution.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think we can connect that to what Michael was naming, in terms of this general pattern of how we deal with conflict as well. And I think, Elizabeth says there is competition, but it's inside of this larger context of how do we find the most cooperative and symbiotic structures. And immature ecosystems tend to be more competitive with things fighting for space and light. But as an ecosystem matures, you get this incredible symbiosis and harmony and everything depending on everything else.
Yes. So that's the cooperative mood that we now what with the corona, we have to work together differently because the enemy is suddenly an invisible war enemy like the virus. So humanity, we can come together in a new form, maybe. Well, that's it. I'll disconnect.
Does anyone have a reflection on that they want to share?
I very much appreciate the model. I think that one of the challenges is to try to think long-term in our, where our historical trajectories have been, and not just like look at the last 25 or 50 years. So I think that the Darwinian worldview is not the worldview that people had or have in other parts of the globe. Indigenous folks and farmers who are working in networks who are not part of the cash economy. So it's one thing I think about. And, also I know farmers all around the world are kind of individualist. They may have cooperative natures, and I don't know. I'm just struck by how to take what Elizabeth was doing and put it up against my own experience, I guess. And I believe in, I'm founding cooperation groups all around the work I do. So I get that point. One of the things, I guess, what I'm struggling with is how not to take a Eurocentric view on all of the, take our models and try to put it over the whole world. So that's what comes up for me. But as a model for what we need to do, yeah. Or how we need to reframe our thinking. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what came up.
It does, and actually it's reminding me of something I wanted to say. I was reading the materials for today's Racial Equity Challenge that focuses on indigenous foodways and decolonizing our food system. And one of the comments in there was that when we read things about what, going back to traditional ways of eating and how those are healthier. This was Michael Pollan's big point in the book he wrote after Omnivore's Dilemma about what we ought to eat, an Eater's Manifesto that has the famous line, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, and then he has explanations for what he means. And Elizabeth also in her piece cites the Mediterranean diet. Now, she's Greek ancestry and talks about that as being, this traditional wisdom. Michael, you named how little we really understand about nutrition, and that was Michael Pollan's point as well, that it's this inherited wisdom that's probably our best guide. Well, in this piece that I read last night, they make the point that they specifically cite how everybody says, oh, the Mediterranean diet. Like, well, what about Native people's foodways?
Oh.
They're left out of this conversation.
No problem.
Our framework
I didn't
is still
see it. Thank you.
colonized.
That's good.
Are you talking to us, Michael? Or maybe that was somebody else near you. So I just, part of the point is, Elizabeth wanted feedback on the piece, and was so I think what I'm taking away from our conversation today is there is complete agreement and alignment with the general call that she's making, and I don't know that I've heard anything that sort of says no. We think we're on the other side of this, and a lot of energy for how to different conversations that might address it. So the only critique I've found was this one thing that I read last night saying, maybe be on the lookout, as all of us are, for how our food thinking has been colonized and reflects a Eurocentric perspective, and that there's tremendous wisdom coming from lots of other directions, including indigenous peoples.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Well, Inga Mehta first got me to, Ben first told me about the butterfly and the caterpillar, which I tell everybody. But Inga Mehta got me here, and she got me to see this little tiny 2-minute presentation, and she validated this grandmother thing, which I dearly love. It was brought up by my grandmother. And so I had always had a puzzle, which is so relevant. All the years of being a child, it was painful to eat at the dining room table. It was uncomfortable and unpleasant. It was always some defensive thing. But after the meal, the females went into the kitchen to clean up. And as a little child, my cleanup job was to finish the food on the plates before they washed them. And I loved it. And the whole environment in the kitchen was this cooperative environment. And the whole environment in the dining room was this Darwinian, Uncle Arthur gave you more wonton than he gave me, and I can't have a second piece of meat, and I want my candy. And it was always this fighting over rights and who should have what in the dining room, which was like a new imposed civilization imposed on immigrants who wanted to be upwardly mobile. But in the kitchen, there was something much more tribal and feminine and cooperative. That was the main thing. I also wanted to say, Rosenberg says, distinguish between a strategy and a need. So to accomplish these things, if we take one need, there's so many needs we've just brought up today. So if we all agree, we're all talking about going after the corporations, or we're all talking about each of us improving our moral standard, or whatever need we each agree is what we're all trying to work on together. If we can agree that we're talking about the same need at one time, there are hundreds of strategies. But if we begin by talking about strategies, stop eating meat, start putting nitrogen on the soil, if we start with the strategies, Rosenberg says it will take us 100 times longer to resolve the problem than if we agree that we're going to cooperate about which need we're addressing first, second, and third.
So here's Elizabeth. Just wanted to, as we come to the close of our 90 minutes here, send her some good energy, some good wishes, some appreciation, some thanks for all the wisdom, the inspiration, the wonderful contrarian thinking, the clear-sightedness. I'll stop the screen share because I don't think we can see. Here, I'll go. Now we can send her the visual love.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Our pleasure.
Yes,
Thank you.